MMV works with partners to discover, develop and deliver medicines for malaria. Over the past 18 years, we have brought forward 7 effective and affordable anti-malarials and taken on the access stewardship of 2 others. These medicines will help secure a malaria-free world. Our co-supported medicines have contributed to achieving Millennium Development Goal 6C. 6 million people were saved from malaria between 2000 and 2015. Despite this progress, malaria continues to plague nearly half the world's population and takes the life of a child every 2 minutes. As well as this, drug resistance is an increasing threat. In light of these challenges, the brightest minds in public health have devised ambitious global strategies and goals, targeting malaria elimination and ultimate eradication. The aim is to reduce malaria infections and deaths by 90% by 2030. To reach these aspirational targets, we need an innovative drug pipeline. This is what's driving MMV's 5th business plan. We are focused on the unmet medical needs of people suffering from malaria and those at risk of the disease through 3 steps: control, elimination, and maintaining zero. Over the next 5 years, MMV and partners will discover and progress new chemical entities to make eradication possible, develop new combination therapies to overcome resistance, improve compliance, and protect vulnerable populations, support equitable delivery of existing high-quality anti-malarials to these populations. By 2021, through this focused effort, MMV aims to deliver 1 new medicine for multi-drug resistant malaria, 5 new approved products, 7 new molecules entering phase 1 human volunteer studies, a single-dose chemoprevention for malaria relapse, 10 to 15 preclinical drug candidates, new technologies to accelerate R&D, equitable access to MMV co-developed medicines. This ambitious plan will need around $88 million a year for the next 5 years. MMV and partners have saved more than 1 million lives with new medicines. Guided by our business plan, we are committed to saving millions more.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before I begin, what would be lovely is if the MMV board members in the room can just stand up, because while Alan was very generous in terms of his feedback to the management team, this board works strenuously to support us and challenge us during the development of that plan. And so we have a number of new board members who have just come on board over the last several weeks, Dominic and Yuli, but we also have some of the board members who are involved in that challenging process and making sure that we were marching in exactly the right direction, with David, with Wynne, with Joy and with Konji. So thanks for your participation, and please take the chance to introduce yourself to them and talk to them. And of course, Alan. Thank you. Now, just what I'll try and emphasize are some of the things that are different to the previous business plan. One person that didn't stand up was David Bowen, who's on our North American board. And that's also critical because we're bringing on additional expertise in the area of communications and advocacy, because as was pointed out by Ben in his presentation, this is something that's absolutely critical, is to get those key messages across. Okay, so I'm going to just gloss over these slides because Peter Olamezi very eloquently went through all of this. So we do know that a lot of progress has been made over the last 15 years in the battle against malaria. But we also know there is a lot to be done. We're still losing a child every 2 minutes from malaria. And we have the global technical strategy that's been developed by WHO that shows us a roadmap that goes from 2015 through to 2030 and looks at reducing malaria, the incidence of malaria or new infections, by 90% and deaths by 90%, but also, very importantly, eliminating in an additional 35 countries. And you heard Alan's comments about where we currently are tracking versus each of those goals, so there's work to be done. Now, Peter also mentioned, and he had a slightly longer list, but if you condense that down, you come up to around 5 key stumbling blocks, bottlenecks, whatever you want to call them, the things that are getting in our way and we need to overcome. One of the biggest is resistance. And something that I'm going to mention a little later in the talk is just how we get that message of resistance across, because I'm actually really concerned by resistance, but also around the messaging. And it's because of this. If you look at the way the global health community is talking about resistance today, what they do is they use malaria as the poster child of what can go wrong. And then when they talk about the need for new drugs and resistance, they don't talk about malaria. There's a gap, and we need to close that gap because the need for new drugs, the issues of resistance have not gone away with malaria. And so it needs to remain top of mind. So how do we do that more effectively? And there are other challenges also about maintaining the prioritization of malaria. Also, as Alan pointed out, as we begin to get more successful and the burden starts to come down. Now, this is just a slide that says that over the next 15 years, we could achieve a lot. But if you dialed back to the level of effort that we had in 2007, which is lower than today, what would that cost us by 2030? Well, monetarily, it would cost us about $1.2 trillion. Trillion dollars. But if you look at the top, it's the human toll that is enormous. And so we can't let things slip back. And we heard about the need to actually double our investment between 2020 and 25. And so there is a huge challenge ahead of us, which really puts a lot of emphasis on advocacy. Now, this is where I'm actually going to get a little more into detail on the MMV Business Plan, because this is really a product of discussion with you, the malaria community. And so we need to address some of the key challenges, and you've really helped us frame these. And so if you look at the top of this, we're going from control, hopefully, through a pathway of elimination that leads on to the eventual eradication of malaria. And this is the vision. But we're dealing with countries that are in different states of malaria control and different places on that road to elimination today, from high burden right down to countries that are trying to maintain zero. And so the needs of those countries are different today, and the needs are going to change over time, and that's what this tries to represent. So today, we need drugs that are effective against resistant parasites, that are appropriate for vulnerable populations, particularly young children and pregnant women, and ideally have some ability to prevent transmission. But as we move into elimination, that dynamic begins to change, and the emphasis really begins to come down on that blocking transmission so we can really drive towards elimination in countries. We also will be looking towards mass campaigns of mass treat and dose, if you like. We're going to need very simple therapies that are amenable to this sort of mass scale-up of malaria intervention. And they have to be safe, because as you begin to get into populations that include asymptomatic individuals, the risk-benefit actually changes a lot. So we need to really emphasize the safety of the compounds we bring through. As we move out towards that far right and that vision of eradication, then we're looking for compounds that can actually provide chemoprotection, prevention, but also at the same time almost vaccine levels of safety. And that is an incredibly high hurdle, but this is a roadmap of really what we need. So where are we today? Today, we are far better poised than ever before to actually deliver on a lot of these requirements. So we've launched products that are saving lives. And what that means is we're actually building up a level of experience. And I mean by we, it's MMV and our partners. And one of the greatest things is that we have a longevity with those partners, so they're learning and they can reapply that experience. We have the first new P-Vivax drug in 60 years coming through right now. It's completed phase 3 studies. This is not finished yet. There is still a way to go through the regulatory process, but this is very encouraging. And we have new chemical entities coming through with novel mechanisms of action that hopefully will have the type of activity against resistant parasites that we need to see. And we have translational medicine platforms that can help us accelerate those through development and actually de-risk it and help us choose earlier winners versus losers. And there's been a lot of lessons learned, and I think this is a point that Joy also made, was let's look back over the Millennium Development Goal era. What have we learned? And so we internally at MMV has to challenge ourselves and say, what have we done well and what have we done less than ideally? And where do we need to reinforce some of our efforts? And then another area is MMV and its partners are taking a more proactive role in terms of working with the regulators to actually look at how we can do things better in the drug approval process. So if you look at all of those elements, there's got to be some realignment and focus. It can't be business as normal because we're not asked to do business as normal by the malaria community today. So we've had to intensify our discovery effort, and our business plan reflects that intensified effort. There's an increased emphasis on medicines for chemo prevention, chemoprotection, and what that means is, as I mentioned, different levels of safety, also very different pharmacokinetic profiles, or different ways of delivery that will actually give us the type of protection or length of protection that we're really looking for here. A more deliberate approach to product launch so that those products that are launched get out and have impact sooner. And this includes post-approval evidence generation and equitable access. So these are the things that we need to be keeping in mind and working with partners on earlier. The translational medicine platforms, so you've already seen these with the controlled human infection model, and James is here from QIMR. Working to use those in the early phase development. Where we really need to intensify our efforts here is on combination drug selection and bringing those through earlier, ideally to make the phase 2B studies less cumbersome and quicker. And this clearly will also involve working with the regulatory authorities. And that policy and advocacy is essential because, as we've heard right now, this is going to require continued political prioritization, continued resourcing, and nothing is really guaranteed here. Just a very quick anecdote. At the G7 meeting, and where's Andrea? It was around 18 months ago, and there were discussions at the G7 meeting about health prioritization, and it was NTDs. And actually what had happened was AIDS, malaria, and TB had slipped out of the text, which really is a huge loss. And so what we found was MMV was taking a role and putting our hand up, and the expression goose in the courtyard has been used in terms of just alerting people things are not good. We need to continue to underline the priority of malaria, AIDS, and TB and rally our partners around this. And so while we can't build up a huge advocacy organization, we're not MSF. What we can do is we can have a critical level of expertise that allows us to then interact with other key advocacy groups like RBM, like APLMA and ALMA to ensure that we can get these messages across. And this is the final slide, and it's a transition slide between myself and George will then use it as he transitions on to Tim. Because what this does is in one slide, and it's a crowded slide, but it frames what we're going to deliver, but it sort of shows how we're thinking about this. So we have 3 clear programmatic areas. One is about facilitating equitable access. We can do a whole lot of good with the interventions that are out there today. And you heard from Rob about triple ACT therapy, and the potential benefits of that in the management of resistance today. But ultimately, we have to develop better anti-malarial managements to extend our progress in clinical case management and to address vulnerable populations. And then we need to bring forward that third element, and that's the drugs to support elimination and eradication. Now, we've mapped those objectives against, down the left-hand side of this, these are the unmet medical needs, or partially met, or will change over time. And we're trying to reflect that thinking here, and then as we go across, show how that really translates over time to bringing new interventions on board and how they'll contribute. And so now what I'd like to do is hand over to George, and George can actually begin to take you through the left-hand side of that, and that's the near-term introductions as we begin to move through increased control and then on to elimination. Thank you.